All right, Matt, it looks like we've got people coming into the Zoom room and we are live and connected on all the social platforms. So have a great show.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome back. It is time again for Procurement Foundry's monthly Topics in Technology expert panel discussions. I'm Matt Anders, your host and Procurement Foundry Advisory Board member. And I'm thrilled to be back with a very fun topic for our expert panelists to discuss with you, the best and brightest audience of IT procurement professionals anyone could hope to have. Before we begin, note that the Q&A function is enabled, so please join in the discussion there rather than the chat rooms. Any questions we aren't able to get to here, we will follow up on afterwards inside the Procurement Foundry Slack channels. So this month, for most of us, the overwhelming majority of our time is spent dealing with legacy enterprise applications and infrastructure. We pass our days buried in renewals for Oracle and Microsoft and VMware. We do stare and compare reviews of labor rate cards and mobile data plans. Things like hyper-converged server architecture sound way more cool and futuristic than they actually turn out to be. Meanwhile, our IT stakeholders, the CIOs and developers and software architects we aim to collaborate with are thinking about other stuff. Artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, blockchain, cryptocurrency, augmented reality. If you're not at least curious about that stuff, you are probably in the wrong profession. Once in a while, we need to disconnect from the day-to-day and feed our curiosity about the cool new stuff, whether or not there is actually budget allocation for it or current real-world projects in the pipeline. It is essential to be able to speak the language of our stakeholders if we want to develop and maintain credibility with them. And one thing for certain, in IT procurement, things move fast. Just as cloud went from 0 to 100 in a blink, any one of these seemingly futuristic technologies can become mainstream before you know it. With that in mind, the Procurement Foundry has gathered yet another impressive panel of experts to discuss the topic of the day, and it is my pleasure now to introduce them for you. First up, we have David A. Greenberg, a senior IT category leader at PTC. PTC is doing some very, very cool things in the areas of digital transformation, computer-aided design, and the latest advancements in augmented reality. It's just the sort of place to find really smart people like David who have advanced degrees in things like electro-optical engineering. He is a results-oriented IT category management, procurement and sourcing pro with extensive knowledge of IT industry trends, as well as advanced procurement and sourcing principles. He is a highly effective communicator and negotiator with strong analytical, cross-functional leadership and project management skills. And he also happens to be a really great guy, heavily involved in all sorts of community and charitable organizations. Thank you very much for joining us today, David.
Thank you, man.
Next up for our discussion this month, this panelist has been in the procurement space for 15 years, starting as a practitioner at Cardinal Health. He is currently the Vice President of Indirect Procurement Group Purchasing Function at Corcentric. He has been recognized as a top 50 global thought leader in both procurement and cryptocurrency by Thinker 360, as well as being a 3-time Supply and Demand Chain Publications Executive Pro to Know. A passionate early adopter in the cryptocurrency space for over a decade, he has focused on providing qualitative analysis of cryptocurrency projects, partnering with the likes of Binance to help investors make more informed choices about the thousands of coins and tokens that exist. Please welcome Dustin Cochran.
Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here. Looking forward to this conversation.
And finally, a longtime friend of Procurement Foundry, working at the most senior level, leading procurement, IT, and supply chain. Our next panelist leverages his extensive global experience to drive dramatic business improvements and innovation. His human insight and business acumen have helped him achieve transformative results in profitability, digital transformation, and organization development. He's an Everscrew Sourcing Innovation Pinnacle Enterprise Award winner, a member of the Thought Leadership Council at the Institute for Supply Management, and an esteemed member, Sourcing Industry Group Advisory Board. And by the way, he is a Sourcing Industry Group Supernova Hall of Fame Award winner. Following a long and impressive career with senior leadership positions at Motorola and global market research giant Ipsos, Mike is currently VP Global Procurement and Supply Chain at auto industry technology innovator CDK Global. we are thrilled to welcome back Mr. Mike Morsch.
Thank you, Matt. Much appreciated.
All right. So in the past, we discovered what it's like to do technology procurement at a technology company. It has its own unique challenges. David, you should know all about that. PTC is a leader in one of the most entertaining, but also highly practical areas of advanced technology. So if you wouldn't mind, please tell us a bit about what's going on in the augmented reality space and how you work with it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. PTC, the company that I work for, is an ISV. We develop software like product life cycle management, CAD type software. And we've integrated in augmented reality products like Microsoft HoloLens, RealWear, Magic Leap, that allows people to be on the plant floor in a manufacturing environment so that they can have access to manuals, be able to deal remotely and learn quickly. And it's all really neat and cool stuff, but for someone who's in sourcing, who has to get this stuff before it's become, how should I say, well known or really out there in terms of where to get it. The challenge is oftentimes, our developers are like in India, Israel, and the like, and these products aren't. We need them to be in India, or we need them to be in Israel, and they haven't been already. There's no local resellers or VARs in those countries, so that right off the bat, it becomes a huge challenge. And with some of these other smaller ones, it's how do you assess risk when they're the only game in town, and oftentimes purchasing can only be done online with credit cards and things like that. And it becomes a big obstacle, but it's very, very key to working very closely with who the internal stakeholders are so that you can have a clear understanding of what they're looking for so that you can work with the vendor in terms of getting that exact item per se.
So it's not just Pokemon, right? It's not just.
Sorry, I missed that. No, it's not just Pokemon. No. I mean, it is. I mean, I've tried them on. It's really some neat stuff. With RealWear, it comes in pieces. You have your glasses. They have like a hard hat and all that type of thing. With Microsoft HoloLens, it's almost like you have a laptop on your head. It's a lot more weight up there and a visor like that. But it's very, very tricky in terms of working with these new companies who are eager to work with you, but who really haven't worked with the commercial space, because many of these companies, when they came out, they originally targeted the consumer market. And so it just becomes a challenge.
Could we talk a little bit about those non-consumer use cases that are out there?
Yeah, the biggest use cases are in the manufacturing environment, in terms of scaling people up quickly. So people could get trained very in real time almost. They could be on the plant floor and they could be working through how to assemble something or how to, how should I say, troubleshoot something. They could be on site somewhere, and they can be seeing what they're working on, but at the same time be seeing what should be there. They could have manuals come up. They could also be talking to a third party who will be able to see what they're seeing. They'll then circle somewhere on the device that they're working on. And even if they move, which is, I think, the coolest thing, if they move, that circle still stays on that same place so that they're able to go in and actually work on what, how should I say, the one who's knowledgeable about the situation. So it's quicker uptime, it's less lost time when someone goes out on site to do things by having those types of devices. So yeah, it's pretty exciting. It just can be an adventure sourcing, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I think COVID probably has had an impact on the market, right? With telepresence, things even in more advanced areas like medical diagnostics and those fields.
Yeah, huge. You're absolutely right. It allows people to be out there without, how should I say, other people physically there. They can go in and they don't have to have multiple people there in terms of providing help, guidance, and things of that nature. So you're absolutely right. It's COVID's played into it very, very huge. And definitely.
And where do you see in the next 5 or 10 years the biggest advancements and changes in the technology?
The biggest advancements in this technology, I think they're going to be easier to integrate. They're going to be more accessible, and the price point's going to come down, because right now, when people, the point of entry is, you're talking upwards of, like for a HoloLens, 3,000 to 6,000, depending upon the levels of support. And I think the other thing that has to happen is the number of applications that can be integrated in with the HoloLens, and maybe it's, RealWear or Magic Leap or things like that. So eventually it'll move over to more of the consumer space, but right now it makes the most sense in the commercial space by far.
Yeah, at $3,000, it's not quite a consumer price point.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very generous gift. So, no, I agree.
Very cool stuff. Hey, Dustin. You're a bit of a unicorn for us in that you're not just an IT procurement pro. You're not just buying stuff. You're not just a thought leader in that space. You have been very active as a hands-on individual in the crypto space. For those in the audience who may not be too familiar, could you kind of give us an intro to crypto?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a variety of topics in buzzwords that people hear in this space. Cryptocurrency would be most similar to what you're hearing of in terms of Bitcoin or Ethereum. Those are cryptocurrencies. Then you hear the buzzwords of blockchain and smart contracts, NFTs, and there's a whole bunch of things out there that we can dive into a little deeper. But the cryptocurrency itself was, kind of came out of the financial crisis, where folks were losing faith in the banking systems and, looking for something different. So you've seen the current date and time we're in, where, post-COVID, you've got, almost inflation going on in certain areas of the market. You've got low yields in bank accounts, and the climate is right again for, these cryptocurrencies to continue to, grow and become more prevalent. So Bitcoin, I think just yesterday hit an all-time high. So it is really seeing its time in the sun right now. And, it's interesting to have this conversation, Matt, because my experience in the procurement and supply chain space is what initially drew me to Bitcoin, primarily because when people were talking about blockchain as a whole and its use case, the first thing out of people's mouth was supply chain this, supply chain that. And you're like, okay, well, this is something I should dive more into and figure out. And I think, Bitcoin's been around for about 12, 13 years now. And I think we're just now starting to see some of the exciting stuff really come together on how blockchain will really start to impact our space.
Yeah, if you could, right? Blockchain, crypto, you never see them. You just see them always commingled. And if you're not intimately familiar with it, maybe you could help unpack that for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. We could probably spend, an hour ourselves just on this topic of kind of unpacking that. But, in a nutshell, Bitcoin is a blockchain in itself. When you hear about all of these other, cryptocurrencies like an Ethereum, that's its own blockchain. So all of these cryptocurrencies are typically built on their own blockchain. They're starting to become, and a blockchain is really just, I don't know if this is going to help if you haven't heard the term, but it's a distributed ledger. So it is decentralized. It is something that relies on, essentially decentralized consensus. And there's always a record of the transactions that are going on that anyone can kind of peek in and view. And you can see that one source of truth in decentralized fashion. So you can see, how supply chain works, the value of being able to see, the steps along the chain of the supply chain, where the product originated from, where has it gone, what's it been through, and, basically its whole pedigree, if you will, of, throughout the supply chain. So you can have a blockchain without a cryptocurrency. So the two are kind of they can be mutually exclusive. The cryptocurrencies have been a way of kind of monetizing blockchains. And I think that's something where it can get convoluted at times. But the technology itself within the blockchain can stand alone without a cryptocurrency. And I think we're starting to see more applications of that as companies like IBM are developing their own blockchains and deploying them to the likes of Walmart and folks like that.
Yeah, we talk typically, when we think about what we do for a living in the procurement space, we tend to take, we split ourselves to direct and indirect, and we tend to associate supply chain with direct, and we tend to associate IT with indirect, right? But when you're looking at this space, right, that's where there's a real intersection, right, where supply chain is being supported and advanced through IT.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also beyond that. It'll also hit, direct, it'll hit indirect, it's going to hit finance. There's going to be a lot of different parts of the organization that are going to play a piece of this. And if you look at something like, let's just dive into Bitcoin really fast, you can kind of see how it might flow. So you've got companies right now that are accumulating reserves in Bitcoin, like MicroStrategy, like Tesla, accumulating a lot of Bitcoin, maybe as a hedge, maybe for a popularity contest, whatever it is. But you're going to have to hold that as an organization. You're going to have to find out how to protect it and how to deploy it and how to calculate your tax basis. You're also going to see companies get more into their employees requesting to be paid in Bitcoin. So you're going to see technology Like BitPay is one of these providers out there where, employees are going to start wanting their wages to be distributed that way versus in their individual fiat currencies. And, then you're going to see, well, and this is already happening. It's actually one of the original things you saw in the Bitcoin space was accepting payments in Bitcoin. So, there's a famous story about a pizza purchase in the early days of Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin was worth about a penny at the time, a little less than a penny at the time. And a guy in San Francisco bought, a stack of pizzas for what was 10,000 Bitcoin at the time. So those pizzas are now, I think essentially worth about $600 million. So you see, there's always this idea of being able to transact in Bitcoin, but now you're seeing it cross over into the mainstream of, internet retailers like Overstock accepting Bitcoin, companies like Tesla accepting Bitcoin. I think we're going to see a lot more into that in terms of how companies have to look at how do you build the infrastructure to support what's maybe coming down from the top from a strategic focus.
And let's take it back one more step.
Yeah.
Explain, what a Bitcoin is, what a miner is, what that business model is structured.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, if you think of what a cryptocurrency is, how it originated, it's essentially, it's a piece of code. It's a piece of encrypted code. And it's something where, essentially it's now evolved, but from in the early days, it was called proof of work. And, essentially you had, these folks operating computers, GPU type equipment that could, analyze this code, decrypt, these individual, what were called blocks. And, essentially through that process, it was kind of like a lottery. You're going out there utilizing all this computing power, and the first one to validate the block received it. And so that's now, those blocks have gotten a little bit harder to achieve. It's taking more and more computing power to, basically get that. But now look at the reward, so a single Bitcoin is more than $60,000. So it typically scales with, the amount of energy and computing power and time kind of scales with the price. So the higher the price, the more you're typically going to have to put into it in order to, mine a block of Bitcoin. So there's been a lot of negative press based off of that, so all of the energy use that goes into mining Bitcoin. I think a lot of cryptocurrencies within the space have said, how can we maybe do it a little differently than that? And so there's been a lot of other what are called consensus mechanisms to basically figure out less energy intensive ways of doing it. And Ethereum is one that's pivoting to what's called proof of stake. And so that is more how much you hold of that cryptocurrency determines your likelihood of validating that block versus it being a GPU or energy expenditure. So I think we're going to start to see a pivot away from what we've heard of as this energy intensive mining practice, and it's going to get down into a more just driven by holdings. So you're going to see more groups kind of holding larger quantities. And I think that's going to spur the next round of purchases in the space and acquisition in the space.
So that's right. You could do some real, old-fashioned should cost modeling, right? Where there really is a direct correlation between the cost of energy, the amount of electricity, and the cost of the actual compute devices themselves. But really, it's around cheap electricity is where you see these miners set up camp, and there's a direct correlation to the price. People think that $50,000 is just this arbitrary thing, but there is some should cost modeling behind it, right? From a
Oh,
procurement.
absolutely. And I think that's why you've seen a lot of the prevalence of the mining market move overseas to China, where that is, essentially, if you've got the right mandate there, it's free energy, right? So, but even domestically, you see it move to a state like where I'm at, here in Washington State. The cost of energy here, due to the prevalence of hydroelectric, is very low. So there's been, especially in the eastern part of Washington, where land is pretty cheap, it's nice and sunny and easy to get energy. There's a lot of mining farms that even grew up in an area like that. So absolutely, I think it's all part of the calculations that you've got to do as a business, and looking at that business model.
So I'll jump in with our monthly installment of the Procurement Foundry Book Club, because you did mention China. There's a really interesting book out there called Blockchain Chicken Farm, and it's about the utilization of blockchain in rural China, where in the book has a whole bunch of use cases, but in one particular one, it's around the safety of the food chain, right? The security of the food supply chain there, and there's some challenges. So many mouths to feed, some challenging infrastructure within to work to do that. And you will actually find in the most rural, impoverished areas of China, these small chicken farms. They don't tend to do the agro farming, the giant stuff that we do, where they'll have barcoded tags on each chicken. They'll have webcams, and the whole and it's a full blockchain implementation, so that people can be assured that that chicken that they're buying, 1,000 miles away, is actually free range chicken that's been raised the way it said it's been, and they're getting a healthy, well done chicken. And it gives the farmers, it's worth their investment in doing this, higher incomes, because people will pay a premium to know that the chickens are safe. It provides all those advantages, but they're actually, these people who are living on $700 a year are deploying blockchain in chicken farm, and there's any range of applications for it that you'll see there. So
yeah, and it's an interesting point, and I love that, because it's a kind of a key supply chain use case, and it reminds me of kind of one of these funny TV skits in a show, Portlandia, of where you're at a restaurant and you're like, okay, well, where did this chicken come from? And there's this whole side thing about them visiting the farm. And I mean, essentially, blockchain can get you to that level. I mean, you don't even have to leave the restaurant potentially. Like, truly, where did that chicken come from, and what was its environment, and how long ago, was it culled? And that's really in China. I think they're truly becoming really the forerunners of this technology, of how it's going to apply. There's a blockchain food safety council that was, basically a cross-functional organization that's based in China. And I think it started in the pork space, but really for the same sort of just bringing visibility to the food supply, just to help certify, exactly where it came from, the safety, the cleanliness, and really just building more comfort to the consumer about where these products are coming from. And I think that's a great thing. That's not only going from the food space, but you could track it for De Beers is doing it for diamonds, so you could figure out, hey, are these blood diamonds or whatever this is? And basically being able to do this, I started in the pharmaceutical space. So understanding your cold chain along the way for a pharmaceutical, and just being able to track it and have visibility, there's really kind of just endless use cases that I think we're just on the forefront of.
right? I think IBM, you're seeing them advertising blockchain. It's one of the first kind of pop culture uh, touch points people have, and they're looking at, again in that food safety area, where if you are tracking each head of lettuce at every step along the way, when something goes wrong, you don't need to throw out all the lettuce at an entire supermarket's 500 store footprint because you don't know where it is. If you know that this head of lettuce is the one that has a problem and it came from this crate on this truck from this farm, it has enormous implications economically, safety wise, from all sorts of things.
Yep, absolutely. And I think really what you get down to in a lot of the use cases, and this kind of gets into some of the topics like smart contracts, is, when you think of procurement and a lot of what we do, supply chains and the overall management of it, there's a lot of trust involved. And a lot of that trust we have to either address through, long-term relationships where we've built that trust over 20 years and it's just inherent in the supply chain, or you've got a contract for it, right? So you've got to say, oh, because I'm not 100% trustful that if X happens, Y will occur, I've got a contract for it. So a lot of building trust into our supply chain, be it either by utilizing the visibility of a blockchain or utilizing a trustless mechanism like a smart contract, I think that's all going to bring visibility and clarity to our supply chains, which will just help everyone in the end and help detangle, some of our business relationships in a way where they're kind of tangled from a legality standpoint today. So I think that's another area where we're going to see a lot of improvement in B2B relationships.
It's a great point. We could go on and on about the use cases. Our old friend, we'll hold off on more of those. But we have friends in the aerospace industry where every rivet matters, right? And you don't want to have to ground an entire fleet when one rivet goes bad on one wing on one plane somewhere. If you know which production run that rivet came from, and they actually do it down to the rivet level in that industry, and it's only possible with blockchain. But the contracting piece, the audience is asking a lot of questions around that, right? We all live and die by contracts. Mike, I'm sure you have some thoughts around smart contracts and potential applicability in that area.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get to follow David and Dustin here with some really good, strong thought leadership around these very interesting and exciting technologies. And my world is maybe a little more boring, right? Because I typically spend most of my time as the lead of procurement and supply chain looking at internally how we're going to apply technologies to help us be more effective. How do I go justify getting a purchase done so I can use it with my team, as well as help the business be more effective, right? And I think smart contracts sound really exciting, and as we start working more and more with our supplier partners on how we're doing that, I see it as an offshoot of what we're going to eventually do as we're automating more of the integrations back and forth as we're developing the contracts and using the blockchain to use it as that ledger in the cloud, right? That maybe takes some of that stuff out of our internal systems and puts it into an environment accessible by both organizations or many organizations, right? But when I look at, kind of segueing to the way I look at the technology, I never think about it as intelligent automation or artificial intelligence or those type of things. I look at it as, how am I using something to help my team, to help our organization solve problems that we have practically, right? And so that's an age-old IT approach to things, right? But it applies to these new technologies. So as I look at the footprint of systems and the ecosystem that we have internally, ERP systems kind of sitting at the core, what are the new technologies that are popping up that help procurement professionals be successful? And so the things that we've been looking at and working on and implementing are around using them to make spend analytics much more accessible and usable by the organization, right? We're using it to do contracts analytics internally, right? Especially if you're ever involved in large M&A activities, divestitures, or acquisitions, you realize the ability to quickly go through your portfolio or the new portfolio of agreements coming to you is a huge asset to be able to be successful and quickly move through. And everybody just expects you to read a contract once and you've memorized it. And the reality is you need to continually come back and look at things as you're doing those large M&A activities. And so we're applying these technologies to help us work on these initiatives and have much quicker responses to what risks are or things that we can improve on as we look at what we're doing here, right? And so those are big areas, and we're continuing to look at that, right? It's not just analytics, it's then you get into the automation and looking at your RFP processes and how you speed those up and how you take, you know, your robotics to go out and run a little RFP, come back with a fast quote, understand how, is that a good result from the 3 or 4 or 5 suppliers, all happening, you know, and bringing the result back to your team members, right? So the technologies can't just be on their own. The technologies, the way I look at it, artificial intelligence doesn't replace people. It helps them augment and do their jobs better, right? And so nobody loves doing the grunt work involved in procurement and supply chain and those type of things, but they love solving the problems for the business and coming back with that as quickly as we can. And so I try to look at the ecosystem of all these new technologies that are coming out from my own company, trying to help pick out what those are, and then work with our technology teams to get those implemented in our company, right? And so that was a long roundabout way to say that, you know, I think eventually smart contracts will become part of the portfolio of what we do. I think the larger the company, the more benefit you're going to get out of it. And some of the challenges are, you know, when you're a smaller company, you know, 2 billion, 1 billion, 500 million, how are you getting value out of some of these things that are great labor savers for large companies, but a little bit harder to justify it as you're looking at purchasing them for your own organizations if you're a smaller firm. And that's why you have to keep looking at all these new companies that are coming out, because, you know, the problems that you can solve with some of the new technologies get easier and easier, right? And that's the tough nut to crack it as we look at this.
Yeah, I can always count on you on bringing it to, you know, the real world application, the practical side of it. We have a few questions from the audience though to kind of touch on both of those areas. So before we kind of move on into more of the AI related topics and stuff, a couple from the audience. Dustin, what is the proof of work approach for a non-currency blockchain? Like what IBM or Everledger would produce for their distributed ledgers? Is that something you could address?
Yeah, I mean, so it really depends on the blockchain, and there's a variety of approaches that they can utilize. And when I mentioned proof of stake, that is becoming, you know, more and more prevalent as a mechanism. But there's proof of history is a new one that's coming out. There's a variety of consensus mechanisms where we're transitioning from energy intensive proof of work to more or less energy intensive, something where you don't have to have a farm of GPUs to keep your blockchain running. It's not sustainable for most business use cases. And I think that's where, you know, things are trending and where we'll see everything, you know, kind of work out from that validation standpoint. But, you know, we are talking about, you know, typically you're going to want basically distributed consensus on that. You want it by, you know, thousands of computers validating these transactions. So you're removing that business to business risk by having it, you know, basically overseen by third parties. So you are going to have incentives, you know, typically for them to do that work. So a lot of the things like the IBM blockchain, you don't have to have that, you know, in that, because it's being built up for a single organization. Typically, it's a standalone blockchain for, say, Walmart's application or for De Beers application. So it's not really a distributed ledger in that point. It's more of an internal ledger. And I think that's something where we're going to see it go more broadly. And as we do, I think we'll see how this is going to interface with the mining side to truly offer those incentives for validation, because there's going to have to be something involved for the miners to truly do that work from a validation standpoint.
One more question, and this kind of gets to the heart of a lot of this is, when will the value, or what first will be the things that deliver value that outweigh the traditional methods used to accomplish the same outcomes? Things like contracts, audits, quality control testing, achieve similar results. What are going to be the first things that really start tipping the balance towards the newer technology and away from our traditional way of accomplishing the same ends? Anybody that got, I know Dustin's the authority, but feel free to jump in, and David or Mike as well, please.
So I'll start. From my standpoint, talking about a smart contract, I think is going to where we see things start to tip the balance. And being procurement,
can you know what a smart contract is? Yeah.
It's a good question, Matt. And I was thinking about going there. So good tee up. I was watching a TED talk that basically said a smart contract is neither smart nor a contract. It's really just a piece of code, and it's essentially a grown up if then, sort of statement. If X, then Y. And so a lot of people within procurement think, oh, smart contract, that must mean you're replacing this big, massive, 50-page business-to-business contract. And there's no way the complexity there, is never going to be, taken over and automated via the smart contract. Absolutely. I don't think that's even what a smart contract sets out to do. I think we're better off looking at a smart contract as something that automates pieces along the way. So, as X, we think about it as like a grown up vending machine. I put in $1 and something comes out. And there's a variety of different things in a normal transaction where we need that sort of automation. That automation's not occurring today. But you may think about it as, all right, well, we've got software applications we can do that. There's a lot of technology that can, basically dictate if X, then Y. But what doesn't happen, and where smart contracts are exciting, is they become trustless. So what I mean by trustless is you don't have to, it's not one company's software that you're relying on. It's not, the operations of one company that you're relying on. It becomes truly just mandated by the code in a decentralized fashion. So when you look at how that can be applied at those individual levels, the sum of that builds trust to a point where you're starting to get less complex business to business agreements because you've introduced more trust along the way. So I don't know if that answers the question, Matt, or if I got down to the right level, but at a high level, that's really what a smart contract is doing. But we can get into maybe some of those use cases too.
Hey, David, you're a real tech savvy guy. You're also a real, seasoned procurement pro. There's a lot to unpack here. We've had it, if you're not familiar with it, we're drinking from a fire hose. We're doing it, throwing a lot at people. At what point do you start giving thought to using more advanced technologies for the transactional stuff and for the, that part of the procurement function?
Yeah, I think for us, it gets, so much is tied in with other pieces of the business. Legal has to be on board, and feel comfortable. Also, what goes through my mind is how easy is it to, amend a smart contract. So, I mean, to answer your question, it has to be at a place where people feel comfortable using it. I mean, I can't foresee it happening, in the short term.
Are you saying that lawyers are not comfortable with change? Is that what you're implying there, Dave?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, very, very perceptive.
Right? So
Yeah, I mean,
at some point, right? It's not just the IT people, right? It's kind of like when cloud finally became something, when it was something that somebody who's not tech savvy, who's not an IT person can consume and make it productized.
right. I think if I was able to show, if I said, hey, smart contracts, this is how it's going to save us money now, and this is the benefits now, then I would get a lot of attention immediately. But right now, it's not there, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in here quick too. I think one of the things I heard Dustin say at the end of what he was saying is, it builds trust in, right? And that's a key element of the blockchain itself, right? And I mean, we all struggle with that in our day-to-day lives, right? Of having true trust between trading partners across the board, right? And so where we can apply that technology to have that inherent trust in what we do, it just takes away some of the guessing or the worry that we have. How you apply that, we're all looking to see how we learn to do that with smart contracts. But yeah, I don't think of I've learned something in hearing Dustin here. So I'm not thinking of a smart contract as that taking my 80-page statement of work or my 80-page purchase of all the equipment and putting that into the online, and it's just there. It's more that trusting relationship, right?
Yeah.
And the reality too is organizations change, people change, but these agreements, they go on, right? And so you tend to lose your knowledge base and who knows what about things as people leave. So if we can have a system that has the trust built into it and we can just come back and reference it, both sides then can agree. You don't go through some of the pain we all go through today as procurement professionals and dealing with both sides interpreting and looking at things a little bit differently, right? Because it's been locked into this, for lack of a better word, a common ledger, right, for everybody to look at.
And Mike, that's a great point, and that's really what I hear so much from procurement folks is, exactly, coming to terms with what a smart contract really is. And candidly, it's going to sit more within procurement and IT than it will ever sit into legal, which is also a good thing, I think, for all of us, because it's essentially an automation tool. And when I kind of this is outside business to business transaction, but, say an everyday sort of transaction where I think see how this works. I purchased something from Amazon, on Amazon Prime, and, Amazon promises me that'll be here within 2 days. If it's not here within 2 days, I know I can ping Amazon customer service. They'll validate, okay, that didn't occur, that didn't arrive within 2 days. Here's a $5 credit, Dustin. Then I've got to validate, hey, I got that $5 credit added to my account. And that's how that transaction flows. There's promises, there's checking, there's trust, there's validation. Imagine that is a transaction that could be, essentially smart contract. Of anytime I buy something from Amazon via Prime, via 2 day, if it doesn't arrive in 2 days, I get $5. No validation has to occur. It happens automatically. And I just know it's it's part of doing business with Amazon in that aspect. And I think
that's the best, most concise explanation of trust, because trust in this world is a capital T, right? It has a meaning bigger and different than common usage. But we could go on about this stuff forever. I think our audiences love to hear more about some of the real world AI type applications. And from both angles. One, what our stakeholders are using. I know, Mike, you've done some great stuff in RPA in robotic process automation, but also from a procurement standpoint, there's so many tools that we're being presented that are representing themselves as one form of AI or another. Maybe we could talk about some of those tools that people are putting out there and how procurement people should be evaluating and critically thinking about those products that are being presented to us as AI.
Sure. I'll just, touch on some, and I did hit on some earlier. And, I know there's AI in the background on some of the things that we purchased to help us be successful, right? Our spend analytics tool that we utilize from Supplari has that built in there, and it's going to help us better categorize what we do on the data automatically, but more importantly, providing that dynamic spend analytics engine that we can pass out to people in the organization much better than the traditional dashboards, right? I know it's in there. I just don't have to think about how it's working, right? Same on contracts analytics with SealSoft is a company that we are doing business with now. I know it's doing it. It's really smart in the way it searches through things and finding things that we wouldn't have equated to be the same term in an agreement, and yet it is, right? That's hugely powerful for what we've been able to do, right? Those are a couple specific examples. You touched on robotic process automation, and I've been a sponsor of that within our company the last few years, and we got really good applications in our receivables organization and our implementations team on how we better automated, those type of things, right? Not necessarily artificial intelligence, but it's still intelligent automation utilizing tools like Blue Prism or AI Path, those type of things, right? So a little harder to apply though RPA again to a smaller procurement organization, which I still consider ours in buying for a $2 billion company, right? That's why I'm looking for, and my excitement is on, you got the big AI tools that came out. Now what's that next level that I can really apply to the small automations that I want to do as a group? So again, I love that there's AI in the background of these technologies and tools, but I don't think people should necessarily think about it. It's a nice sales pitch though, right? And I believe my supplier partners that they're actually doing it. And we are a software company, and it's something that we talk about with our customers. But again, it's AI, what is it doing for us that's important, right? And so I kind of touched on a few that I thought were important for us and for me.
Yeah, great point. I think RPA, guys tell me if you feel different. I think it's more, there are plenty of use cases for RPA among our stakeholders, things like help desk, automation, things like that. Lots and lots of stuff. We're procuring RPA on behalf of our stakeholders more so than using it within procurement ourselves. And you can get into a lot of debate around what constitutes AI, right? There's whole movies about that, right? Whether it's Blade Runner, Ex Machina, or whatever. But if somebody's representing something as AI, ostensibly it's going to be cheaper and faster and better than the human one. And as long as they're doing that, you probably don't care a whole lot about the AI. Let's talk about though some of the tools around. You mentioned a few, right? Contract analysis, right? Trying to go through your contracts. Big stuff out there now around SOW writing, right? Automating the SOW process, because that's something that's difficult for people to do, and using AI around that. Analysis of tail spend, a lot of AI tools around it. Anybody here, we using much of that? Which ones are you seeing as real, and which ones are you seeing as, there are probably still a lot of human intervention in the background?
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch on one more I know of, and then I'll let David or Dustin jump in, right? But I think one I didn't touch on is just the intelligence you can apply to the RFP process and coaching the bidding activities so that it works out for the suppliers as well as yourself as you go through that process, and having something that comes in and validates that it's a good quote, right? That it's a good bid, that you're actually moved ahead based on your historical data, as well as probably market data that's out there. Really hard for a procurement person to do that really quickly. And that's where I think an AI, can do that much more quickly to facilitate the bidding process, and not just a reverse auction, that type of thing, but really adding intelligence and guidance to the bidders so that on a level playing field, they can all get a good chance to put in a good quality bid that still meets expectations, right? I see that as a hugely popular area. I also, full disclosure, I sit on an advisory board of a company that does this in bid ops, right? And it's a very interesting technology that I think is really going to, that concept will really take off as we go forward.
Yeah, some of the presentations I've seen, they're fascinating. Things like in the reverse auction thing, how quickly somebody responds to another bid is an indicator, like a tell in poker, about what they're going to do downstream. And I question how many cycles these tools have gone through to teach themselves this, but eventually they're going to go through enough cycles that it becomes less human intervention and more real.
Right.
But that's something I think from a procurement standpoint, when you're evaluating these tools, you want to ask those questions, right? How much of this is true automation and how much of it is still human enhanced work in the background? Because that should drive some of your decision making, I would think. All right, guys, we're coming up last few minutes here. What other thoughts do you have in this space? I think a lot of the questions we're getting, a lot of chatter is around what things are the most real? How soon is, you're going to get your Starbucks with crypto? How soon is this stuff just going to be less geeky like us and more mainstream? And what areas do you see it happening in? David, your stuff, augmented reality. I mean,
I don't see augmented reality coming to sourcing and procurement soon, but RPA is definitely here now, and the AI bit. I see different vendors that are talking about, like you're mentioning, the tail spend and all that, and analysis of spend. That's here now. Whether it's truly AI or not, it's sometimes hard to tell. The crypto stuff, at least with my org, I can't see that happening in the short term by far.
I could see use cases, things like visiting a factory floor, right? Some of the stuff we have to do on site, I could see down the road, not too far down the road, virtually touring a production facility without having to go to Beijing, right? That seems not that far down the road. And the COVID, world we live in, I think has accelerated that in terms of making it more mainstream.
Yes, definitely. I agree with you 100% on that. It's opened up a whole new world, in terms of the being able to do things remotely. Definitely.
Well, and you're seeing it cross over into the consumer space already. I mean, we're selling a house and buying a house right now. We don't even have to step foot in the new house. We can, tour it virtually, essentially. And, exactly to, Matt and David, your points, extend that to site visits. You could do that live with that sort of technology, have those cameras installed where, your customers can always view your site and walk through it and see the status. So, exciting things just on the cusp there that I think are crossing over in the mainstream right now.
Yeah,
so I think, we'll see it.
Great example there. Again, talk about the house is it's real reality today. There's one thing about telepresence, being, walking around in it, but the augmented reality is where you can now, you want to buy a chair or a sofa, you hold up your cell phone and it shows it in your room, right? And that's already mainstream augmented reality application. And you're doing it, without a $3,000 device, you're doing it on your phone.
Exactly. No, that's a good point.
Mike, any final words of wisdom for our audience?
Well, I think my final words are just, I think it's exciting to look at these technologies and really understand them. And I've learned a lot just listening to Dustin and David today. I am looking forward to augmented or virtual reality coming into procurement, or popping up for our users to go pick from their virtual augmented reality catalog, right? And being able to pull a product out and turn it around and look at it, right? I mean, there are some really practical implications of what that would be to make that purchasing experience good, right, or better. Because we all try to buy something and you're visualizing it as a two-dimensional item. And any way to get that more three-dimensional is always exciting, right? So I do think that, hopefully sooner than later we'll see it, but otherwise people are just, it's Pokemon Go maybe, and they're chasing down Pikachu to find their purchase, right? So, that's it for me. So thanks.
Thank you. Great panel, guys. I know we can go another hour with this if we wanted to, but if you are interested in this topic in the audience, please go over to the Procurement Foundry. Lots of conversation on this, and it's not just with these three experts. It's with the thousands of members of the Foundry there with their real world experience and their thought leadership. So go to the after party there. And thank you, panelists. This was a great one, and I look forward to seeing everybody next month.
Thank you.
Take care.